Um, thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Would you like to step through these, Tantiana, or you want me to start?
I would be happy to do, I think, the first one and the second one. So, number one, let me just step back and echo Leslie's welcoming comment earlier to everyone online and in the meeting room in DC there. Welcome to our work group, our privacy and security work group meeting. We hope to have a very engaging, interactive, and exciting discussion. We want to learn from you as well in terms of understanding the HIPAA risk analysis. What is it? Is supposed to be? How are we doing it? Why are we, as a healthcare sector, continue to fail at this, as an outcome of the OCR audit of HIPAA covered entities and business associates? So, going on to the first slide, please.
Yes, sorry.
Sorry.
I'll need you to monitor the chat for me, please, since I'm showing.
Sure. Yes.
There we go.
Yep. So just getting back to basic, what are the objective of doing a HIPAA risk analysis, or we've also heard it being called a HIPAA risk assessment? There are multiple reasons. First off, it's compliance and it's regulatory compliance. It is embedded in the HIPAA security rule that covered entities and business associates will conduct these HIPAA risk assessment. And in fact, when there's a data breach reported and OCR pick that up and going to do the investment, that's the first thing they look for. So that's ensuring compliance. And we also think doing a risk analysis is a necessity to identify vulnerabilities in your organization. And the vulnerability is sort of a catch-all. What type of vulnerability? Obviously, is security vulnerability, but it gets back to, in order to do this, in order to understand where your vulnerabilities are, you have to understand what's putting your organization at risk. And it's essentially the PHI data. And PHI data is sort of like, that's your treasure chest, your baby. How are those things at risk? It means who's creating where the data is created, who has access to it, where's it transferred to, who has editable and modifiable rights to that data, where's the data stored, who and not only in your organization, but where else that it's been shared to, and are they appropriately protected? So it's all the systems that touches the data and the people that access that data. And thereby, then you can start to see the proliferation of potential points where the data would be at risk. And so it's large, but it also allows you to prioritize in doing the risk analysis, prioritize these vulnerabilities so that you can do number three, which is to mitigate the risk. You cannot boil the entire ocean in your organization, so to speak. So it means once you've identified this vulnerability, it allows you to prioritize according to risk, from very high risk to high, medium, very low, etc., and then apply the appropriate mitigation strategy to these risks. And then, because you can't bring risk to zero, so it bring the risk to an acceptable level, and thereby the appropriate mitigation strategy. And once you've done those, then potentially it could prevent data breach by addressing the threats before it become a reality. So it saves you a lot of headache when there's a breach, and also to protect patient privacy. And then doing this risk analysis up to this point, once you've identified the risk, you've identified this mitigation strategy, it allows you to conduct or build a risk management plan, put that in place in your organization. And the risk management plan will provide input toward building your business continuity plan, as well as your disaster recovery plan. Again, when there's an incident occur, you know which one has the highest risk, and it needs to be resuscitated first of all. as part of your business continuity and disaster recovery plan. And then, of course, lastly, it helps the organization to do your strategic planning. It allows you to create that security program that's specific to the organization, to your goal, and to your strategy, short term and long term. Also to build your budget, your resources, etc. So a question that we always ask ourselves is, how often should a risk analysis be conducted? And this is a question that I think we will come back to when we go into that discussion with this work group overall. Obviously, we need to have a baseline risk analysis done first so that you understand where everything lies, and then sort of how often should it be repeated? I have my own perspective on that. Risk analysis cannot be only done once and put it on the shelf and think that's it. No, because your organization, your operation changes, your external environment changes, your customer, your vendors, your partners changes with time, and also your system that you have in-house. And when you update, you change vendor, etc., or threats, just cybersecurity threats, the bad guy out there, that we continue to monitor activities and reacting to that. So more to come. Next slide,
Just to
please.
add on to that, Tantian,
Yes.
I
Mhm.
think one of the best practices that I get to see are the organizations that not only do an initial risk analysis, but they adopt risk management and literally on a daily basis with every decision, consider what risk is associated to the data
Yeah.
they handle. So I like to see it literally
Mhm.
daily.
Yep. This slide here is just to sort of baseline our understandings before we move into the discussion very shortly. Is HHS, Office of Civil Rights, they have an overall responsibility for to enforce federal civil rights law across the board. But we're focused specifically on their responsibility to HHS, which is to enforce HIPAA rules on the covered entities and the business associates. So they're looking at both privacy and security rule in HIPAA. And I won't bore you with, we understand what they do, but they also have a second responsibility, is to provide annual reports to Congress on HIPAA compliance as required by the HITECH Act. And I believe that this slide deck will be shared with everyone after the meeting, but in the green bar at the bottom, that is an active link that would lead you to the latest report to that OCR put out on HIPAA privacy security rich notification rule. And this leads us to the next page, which from that report, the last report to Congress on 2022 data, we see that, from OCR conducting investigation and audits of covered entities and business associates pursuant to report of data breach, the year of 2022, they received 30,435 new complaints in that year, which is on top of all complaints from previous year. And OCR was able to resolve 32,000 plus complaint. 87 resolved without a formal investigation. Okay, they did investigation, they did compliance review, and of course, 80% of the compliance review came out with corrective action plan or civil monetary penalty. But we're looking at, from the investigation and compliance review, you see common vulnerabilities and areas that OCR cited for improvement across the board. We see the first one is the lack of conducting security risk analysis and implementing risk management plan. And so there are other vulnerability, but I think we're taking that priority area number one in order to dig into why is there a lack of consistent risk analysis being done, either for the first time ever or a more recent, current risk analysis being conducted that would showcase that your risk management plan reflects your current environment, your current threats and vulnerabilities that the organization faces. Okay?
Thanks, Etienne.
Yes.
So this is where we need your help. We continue to have this issue come up over and over, every year after year. What is happening, especially thinking about our smaller to mid-size entities, that they are either not doing risk analysis according to just even the basic HIPAA security rule, or they're not adopting risk management, and they're just not, they don't seem to be getting it. Across the board, they're missing policies and procedures. They're not doing training. They don't really know what data they handle, how it's created, received, maintained, transmitted. You see lots of helpful things. All you have to do is a chat GPT search, and they'll get all kinds of great things about what is out there, but it doesn't get done. So we're trying to figure out, because we keep saying, let's do something to help our industry. Let's go to those small, mid-sized entities and say, hey, here's something that's helpful. We thought maybe a list of all the places where you can go to get those materials. But we just kept talking about it, saying there's something else that's being missed here, or else we wouldn't keep having this issue literally decades later. So I'm going to start, because there's something that drives me absolutely crazy and has for many years. And it comes from the fact that the risk analysis requirements in HIPAA are on the HIPAA security rule, and they talk about EPHI. But when I'm talking to a small or medium-sized organization, I want them to focus on all of their data, and I want them to first think about whether it's hard copy or spoken or electronic, and understand how it moves through their organization before they can even get into anything else. And I mean, that's, I think, one of the problems is we still have a prescriptive security rule that says electronic health information only is where it's focused. I don't know. What's everybody else think? I'm really interested to hear about Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, so, I was thinking about what the whole idea of this, right? So, at Mayo, obviously, it's not just electronic. It's all aspects. I think though that we are well positioned, in the industry. We have our risk team, Office of Information Security, HIPAA compliance office. I mean, we are layered for this work. So in some ways, not a fair fight, right? Mayo is very well positioned, and we actually have a full focus 2-year, how are we managing our infrastructure from a network optimization perspective all the way through how are we engaging our patients around security. And when you receive information that says Mayo, you can know that it's from Mayo if it's got our appropriate emblem, the email, whatever on it. My worry is more the vendors that we work with and the community groups that refer to us, right? So I think, Leslie, you're right that it's that we're in an ecosystem. So how do we make sure that we are looking to support those? So in somewhere we had a conversation about a podcast, right? I've actually spoken on some of those meetings where it's impact, so cybersecurity attacks, right? The Change Healthcare, connecting with users of, say, Epic, and making sure they're understanding it's not just an Epic solution or problem, it's all of ours. What are you doing beyond that? What's your risk assessment? What are you doing on a daily basis?
So are you suggesting that because we're in an ecosystem, as we work with stakeholders, other partners, other third parties, we should be asking about the risk assessment as a way to kind of push the issue?
That's so every vendor that I contract with, I'm asking, what is your risk assessment? Every partner that I have that's already in my ecosystem, I'm asking and talking about, especially after our survey, attack of 2021, 23, 24, whatever. it is. Change healthcare.
February 25th.
And so that's one thing, but then I think what I've experienced in those conversations is that it's somebody else's job, or it's too scary to move there. Because it feels so big. So what does that mean to start taking on a risk assessment? And so I know that there's a lot of tools, but how do you make it, what's in it for me?
Well, that's a really interesting point. And if anybody, oh, I see Tatiana, please go ahead, jump in here.
Yes, I apologize to the commenter who just made, you made an excellent comment in that an organization need to require your vendor suppliers to do risk analysis. And in fact, I would take it further in that for, let's say, a covered entity, you are beholden by the HIPAA security rule and the privacy rules that's embedded. So in actually you contract with your third-party vendor whom ultimately will become a business associate, you need to make sure that the contract language convey all the responsibility that organization A has needs to be quote unquote transferred to organization B, who is the vendor that's providing the operational support on behalf of operational A. So in a sense, it's not just doing, I'm a covered entity. I need to do the risk analysis. You as my vendor or major supplier, you also need to do the risk analysis, including making sure that your organization, if you're handling my data or you have access to my system, you need to have the same security control as I do to comply with HIPAA.
I wanted to come back to this concept of there are lots of tools, including the same security requirements. Sorry, I didn't want to lose that. You said there's lots of tools. Well, that's actually another part of this problem, I think. One of the most recent free good tools is the one off of, is it the OCR website, the SRA tool? But that is only for electronic PHI. I mean, so we start with a piece versus the larger issue, I think. The other thing is, it seems like this takes an enterprise. This takes a multidisciplinary team. Your business and compliance people understand the requirements of the regulation and the fact that you move data for whatever purpose you move data, which could be very different. We could all move data completely differently depending on what business we're in. And then your technical people understand how the technology supports that, but you need them all working together to answer the question of, did I do a good job of my risk analysis? I mean, I feel that's part of the problem, is it's not clear that this shouldn't be IT's job. It shouldn't be compliance's job. It shouldn't be any one person's job. This should be how you understand your business, you understanding your data, and then how the technology supports it and how it moves. And honestly, how you use and disclose it for purposes of privacy too. It's bigger than just, I think that's part of the thing I'm trying to say is I think part of the problem is we're pigeonholed into security at this security rule, and we're not helping people understand the bigger picture. What else?
What strikes me is when I hear from Brenda, she goes, well, we have teams that work on this and that. That's not your typical provider. When I think of my brother-in-law, who's a family doc in Virginia, and we would go to him and say, hey, how'd your risk analysis go? He'd look at me like I had two heads, right?
Yeah.
He said, oh, that's our IT group, which is run out of a basement, in Herndon, right? And so somehow, because when you're talking about, we need to get, risk analyses out there, it's really, we should be aiming at those smaller folks that really are struggling, right? And when I would go out, when I was with MGMA, I'd go out and talk about this. And, if I talk to them about, well, you should do this because OCR is cracking down, you could have a fine. They would say, well, they've issued 25 fines in 10 years. So what's the chance of me getting the fine.
Or I'll go on
Zero,
business
right?
first.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
I've got better ways to spend my money. But if you talk to them about business continuity, and you say, forget OCR, that's out of the picture. What would happen if your docs couldn't get access to their data? Or if you lost a month's worth of claims data? That could devastate, the organization. So you go in with talking about protecting your business,
Yeah.
not compliance, but protecting your own money.
So that's
Frankly,
just
if
the
it's
way
a-
you
yeah.
convey it.
Exactly. And then the other issue that I found is that some of the tools are fantastic. As you mentioned, OCR and ASTP have some tools, but most of them are tools that ask questions. They say, here's the section in the law which talks about this, and you must do the following. They need a tool that actually fills in the blanks, because they don't know how to answer the questions unless they hire a consultant for, thousands of dollars. So I think whatever's out there that is sort of plug and play is maybe part of what the work group can do, is to identify some of these really effective and low cost, if not free tools, and annotate them as well, explain what they do and what they don't do. And, maybe you could get them out through the AMA or whatever, to get them to the folks that really need them.
Well, I think the NIST 866 does a really good job, and it's free, of saying, this is what we're explaining and here are some samples. I mean, it's almost giving the drop-down selections.
Yeah.
It's not, but of course, it's compliance again. I think you're right. I think we're approaching it wrong, and why, this is the better time where cyber attacks and business continuity are the thing everyone wants to talk about. So taking it from that perspective is huge.
Well, and just one more thing, I think Change Healthcare did us a favor in reminding us how vulnerable we are as an industry to data exchange, and maybe using that, not to blame them or point fingers, but the other issue is if Change can have a breach, and I've literally been to their facility in Nashville, it is like Fort Knox. If they can have a breach, then anybody can.
I said that all along.
Yeah.
Any one of us was just lucky it wasn't us.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you giving me a chance to redeem myself from last year when I sit up there and said, it's not a matter of, it's a matter, it's not a matter of
Yeah,
if, it's a matter of when.
absolutely.
Thank you. So you knew I was gonna say it.
We were so
Sorry,
lucky.
somebody else was gonna say something.
No, I mean, I was just gonna add on, what I think Rob was very articulate in terms of what he was saying. I mean, small physician practices do not have the wherewithal to do security risk analysis in most normal circumstances. It's not a personnel that they can call. There's a consultant that is gonna charge them to do it. So, the resources is what it really comes down to. That they do not have the resources, they do not have the in-house expertise to do that. I'll say that for those folks that follow the physician fee schedule, it was just finalized on Friday evening. There was a part of that in there that called on and adding to the security risk analysis measure under the MIPS promoting interoperability category, that added security risk management to that. So now there's two attestations that physicians have to do related to this. I will say that, and I'm happy to share the American Medical Association's comments about this, but I mean, what we said basically was that, again, going back to everything that we've already talked about, there's not really in-house expertise to figure out what the difference is between security risk analysis and security risk management. How do small practices kind of figure that out? How do they attest? Nobody wants to do the wrong thing, but nobody wants to attest to not doing, and not do something. So there's that balance that needs to be struck. But it does really come down to resources. And, in terms of Change Healthcare, I mean, let's be clear. And again, in terms of resources, I mean, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They could not keep their data secure. Physician practices obviously are functioning on a much different scale. still have, important information that they need to protect. But, there's not that kind of level of resources that somebody like Change could implement. Practices, again, do not have that wherewithal to do it.
Tantian, I think you had your hand up. I'm sorry, then we'll come to Rob.
Yeah, I was thinking, and I don't know if I'm naive, but I mean, we know that large, mega organization like Change Healthcare, United, they have, the resources to set up that compliance arm and, look at security. But if we're talking about small organization or even medium size, after some point, am I naive to ask the question, are they even aware that risk analysis is a compliance issue? It's in the security rule?
And I would say from a large organization, I mean, it's a have to, right? We're being attacked on a daily basis. So, for us not to have something, we'd be in the newspapers. I'm wondering about the smaller, if they just feel like the newspapers are going after the change, they're going after the ascension, they're the big splashes. Are the smallers not seeing the risk because they're just not seeing the risk? How many, or are we making, I'm just curious, like, what are the stats on smaller to mid-size providers?
I mean, we didn't just steal the toy railroad museum's artifacts last week. They stole it from the Louvre because that's
Right.
where the big things were.
Exactly.
But there's a counter to that. I wanted to just see if this group thought anything about this. I was at lunch and we were just talking about how the AWS failure for a few hours, where you realize we've got all of our eggs in one basket. We've got this whole concept of the internet was distributed, single point of failure, and we've got all sorts of points of failure. So I wonder if there's a component of this that I don't really see in the regs about system level failure because of the largeness of the, we've got the too big to fail, banks thing in healthcare increasingly and it's frankly not just healthcare. It's how many large healthcare systems use either AWS or Google or Microsoft as their cloud. And any one of those going down for any length of time can create an enormous continuity issue at a systems level where you can't find a resource elsewhere. So I just wonder if that's a piece of this that we need to think about.
It was so widespread. I mean,
Yeah.
through the day, you just kept hearing more and more and more that was affected. I'm sorry, Rob.
Yeah.
No, thinking about this, I wonder if there's a potential project for the work group, and that is to identify some best practices in a specific area. And that would apply to large organizations and small ones dealing with their outside vendors, because that's what, Brenda, you mentioned, that's apparently what happened to Change.
Mhm.
It wasn't internal, it was an external. And maybe that's an opportunity, because it also applies to small physician practices where they're relying on outside folks, and just give them some best practices. And it could be segmented by organization size or complexity. But and maybe it's already been done and it's just a question of bringing some resources together.
Well, and that was what we started to do. We actually started and said, oh, this will be easy. There's so much out there. We're just gonna sit down and get a list of all the things that are, you can already find that people just don't seem to follow. And then it was like, wait a minute, if we have all this, why are we still having this problem?
Yeah.
But I really do think that with the smaller entities, especially providers, it's a whole different argument, if you will, or a presentation.
Chuck.
But you've got a lot of small vendors. So if your larger organizations are doing the downstream and saying, hey, I want to know that you've done your risk analysis and and that will help push things too. Did we have a comment that I missed?
Chuck Verwerka put into chat, while this discussion's been underway, I searched for the SRA questionnaire templates. when I landed at the ASTP ONC website, I received a message of ASTP ONC website down.
Yeah.
It says more than
Website spelled
that, but
incorrectly.
Because they're using.
it also says more than that, if I recall.
I know. Well, we're not solving our problem here. But there are definitely some really good key points.
They're 25 minutes still. Yeah.
I know, we still have time.
Well,
Yeah, I'm really interested in all of our eggs in one basket. I don't know what we do about it, but, you know, we've had over the last, what, 15, 18 months, whatever, we've had two, one not as much as the other, points of failure that affected virtually everybody in this room,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Between a large vendor and then a cloud provider. And that's not gonna get smaller. That's not gonna go away. And how do we, even if we can just communicate some kind of a best practice for ensuring that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, either with your trading partners or with your cloud vendors or something. Because we can't take our businesses out of the water for a day or weeks or months, depending on how severe that failure is. We don't want to relive February of 24 ever again.
I know Chuck has his hand up. I just want to
I'm
say
sorry.
something quickly before I leave that, because as a person that gets to work with a lot of different organizations, I'm often saying to them, well, what's your backup to your cloud service provider?
Yeah.
And they'll say, oh, come on, do you know how big they're never gonna go down.
Well,
And I'll say, wait a minute, and they'll say, well, that's a decision I get to make. It's my
AWS
risk
is
management
big.
decision. So, I mean, I think the point about no single point of failure, which is a basic security premise, we could do something around that specifically as it relates, and we could pick up on these things.
yeah.
I too was shocked it hit my workflow provider and somebody else that I didn't even think about.
Yeah.
Chuck, did you want to comment on that, please?
My comment is about an earlier item. I'm having trouble keeping up with the progression of the
sorry.
conversation. So I
I
don't
did
want
go
to detract from your current topic.
No, I think, are we good on
Yeah,
what
we're
we,
good.
and I think I have it in the notes, so please go ahead.
Okay, I think that when we talk about what can we do about this, right? Years ago, I went through the SRA guidelines, and there were three that I reviewed at the time. One was physical security and electronic security, and I forget the title of the third. There's three different areas that the SRA template questionnaires addressed. And I really believe that if we could convince any organization to have one of their people familiar with their operation just read the questionnaire, it'll scare the heck out of them. And they can do it in like 2 to 3 days. You can just read the questionnaire and see what the questions are. And the questions themselves, for someone who is familiar with the operation of an organization, will highlight to them, oh my gosh, never thought of that. Oh my goodness, we're exposed here. Oh dear, do we have lockouts on our PCs or our screens where people can't walk by and see the data? You know, all of the sorts of basic controls that people just don't even think of or don't place any importance upon. If we could get them just to read it, the awareness level, I think, would be considerably enhanced, and at least questions would start to be asked. I think the difficulty here is the questionnaires are not made readily available. Organizations say we don't have time, you know, and it just brings to mind the old story about we never have time to do it right, but we always have time to do it over. And guess what? You can't do this over. Once the horse is out of the barn, the horse is out of the barn. So just, I don't have the solution, but I think an approach is get people to read the questionnaires. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chuck, it's a great comment, and yet I'm sitting here thinking, so, we had an opportunity to learn about what cybersecurity meant to us at Mayo 6 years before the change event. Nothing happened, none of our information was breached, but there was an opportunity that arose that allowed us to learn from it. And we didn't. And so many of us have read the guide, and we speak to leaders and whatnot. So I just don't know. Is it that? Is it awareness, or is there something in this that we need to make it personal to the business continuity? You can't see your patients, right? Like, how do we bring it? I don't know. It's almost too technical and too scary.
Well, I think
Ask
the opportunity to say, oh, belongs to the technical people is
Yeah.
easy.
Right. So. How do we help those who are trying to influence by reading the guidelines to have that voice?
There's been a recent, you mentioned podcasts, there's been a recent podcast, I can't think of now who it was. But, the same guy comes on like for 3 minutes every week with some new kind of perspective on cybersecurity. And I thought, oh, I can listen to him, it's a minute or two, I'll do it. Maybe we could set up some way to pepper them with these kinds of things. A series of, what about no single point of failure? It has to be much more interesting to them. We can't use the same words that one thing we know we're trying to get across, but I mean, maybe it's the delivery as well.
What's in it?
Yes. I do like the, cybersecurity is the thing to talk about today. It's a way to turn it to today's discussion and being able to come in from the perspective of save your business. And there's a lot of good work, like we've had all the federal people over the summer, the stuff that the Administration for Strategic Response and Reporting, ASPR. I mean, they have some wonderful toolkits and things for our healthcare organizations, for the individual worker to say, what do I do if I can't use my system? I think we need to teach people that if you get attacked, you can't use your system. How are you going to do business as usual? And maybe that's a way to say, see, if you have a good risk analysis, it's like you said, it's a hard one to sell. Well, you've given us some really good ideas with this discussion so far. We've got the different perspective to focus it more on business continuity versus compliance. And probably also to make the delivery better. What came to mind? We were talking earlier about the high-tech money and how it all had to be infused. Remember where they called regional extension centers?
Yeah.
Why didn't they do risk analysis with the providers? I mean, they were trying to move data from paper to electronic. That kind of a model was a great way to get the resources to the doctors, because if they're just going to have them attest it with MIPS, the MIPS requirement, they'll either attest and not do it, or like you said, they'll have to do something that's kind of, halfway done, because they don't have the time or interest.
I think you must have read our public comment letter on the HIPAA security rule, because we did recommend, even though it's out of scope for OCR, was to create a new group of regional extension center-like organizations to do this work for physician practices that, again, don't have the resources, don't have the knowledge to do it. So,
Well, could
I
we?
mean, that would take an investment. It is a kind of a money question, but I think that is, and that's something that I would love to hear additional feedback on. If people have.
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, and if what you did was have them start with a risk analysis, then you could take a tool and you could prepare, a series of answers and say, or other, can you answer this? It would be easier for them to respond if someone helps them, kind of spoon feeds them through. But that's what our regional extension centers did, right?
Yep.
Now, we don't want to repeat our mistakes, right? We missed a huge component of our industry. some huge components like mental health. And there were other components that missed out on all that. But that's assuming that, you know, our government's functioning and we have all the things we need to actually carry it out. I mean, is there a way we can latch onto these other initiatives? I mean, like the kill the clipboard? I don't know, I'm just throwing things out there, things that are happening now that have a lot of initiative. Is there a way that we could come in behind it to say, don't forget, risk analysis is the first part?
Well, I think the obvious thing is APIs, right? You know, you've got 0057 telling the world that it's a revolution. Well, who's gonna pay for that? I think back in the rec days, where there was a specific program that was funneling money to the providers with meaningful use. We actually talked about this at lunch, saying, you know, maybe, you know, we're not in the position to be asking for money, but it's probably going to take that type of investment. And the argument is it's really an investment in public health. Because if you have a change healthcare incident, it impacts the ability of providers to treat patients. And so if you bundle it together and say, if we're gonna have this revolution in data exchange, we better have the guardrails around it or we're gonna have more problems.
As more data is being shared across the
Yeah.
healthcare ecosystem, we need to make sure that there's a privacy and security backbone.
The Sequoia project just released suggestions for privacy. I'm sure you all articulate much better than I, but the bottom line is that recognizing that states have different rules about privacy. But if we could all agree to a way to tag the data elements, then each state could say, genetic information gets treated this way. But if we tagged it, then we would all be consistently tagging the same data. In other words, a way to spread that. I guess my point is, that's what, if we're looking for current initiatives that are moving, that it kind of waylays into, I don't know, just throwing spaghetti on the wall.
Yeah.
Mark, you're being incredibly quiet.
He's
That's
coding
not
his head.
usual for
I
you.
saw
Because you're sitting next to me,
No,
I
no.
shut you down.
No, but, well, you know, having last week gone through like 191 questionnaire for an assessment, you know, that's something I do on a fairly regular basis, so it's a real challenge.
Do
You
you
know,
mean-
thinking, Chuck said, read the questionnaire, actually having some samples of how you respond to the questionnaire would be equally useful.
Well, I'm self-serving saying this, but you know, we still have the old idea that you use an independent third party to do an independent review with subject matter experts, whether you say high trust or accreditation or whatever else might be out there, so that we can trust each other. And that way, one organization doesn't have to look at everybody else's gory details. You have to figure out a way to trust. I mean, there's that possible solution to do this too. But clearly, we have to be able to trust each other to move this data around. And we know that the smaller entities aren't able to even do a risk analysis.
I feel like the trust portion is huge, and this is such a stretch in comparison. But trust is always the issue, right? Always, 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 always. There's always gonna be this lack of trust. And I wonder, even though this is an extreme example, and like I said, a totally ridiculous comparison, but stay with me. My mom is Colombian. There was a huge constitutional ratification process recently, and there was a huge push to reconcile parts of the country and build bridges between like guerrilla warriors who had decimated villages and people whose families had been affected. And there was this massive vote in the country to say, okay, do you want the government to do this program where we just, through conversation with these completely different groups of people, start reconciling? And this is something I've seen in other public health areas that are more tangential, which I think is what this is, you know, it's not. It's not public health that you study in your masters of public health, but I've seen this in public health related to police violence and communities affected by this. They sit down, they have, you know, reconciling conversations. This is, like I said, I'm not doing a one-to-one here, but if the issue is always trust and we have multiple stakeholders who are saying, well, if the so-and-so would just do their job, then I wouldn't have to worry about it. Or if the so-and-so says, well, if you just did this, then we wouldn't have to worry about it. And no one's willing to do the work because they don't want to settle into that trust. But what I'm asking is there's some sort of opportunity to host a trust building exercise, because this is again and again a huge part of the problem in healthcare. And I haven't seen anyone really address it, I don't think. And my examples were very different, but I know that really difficult trust can be addressed when you take the time, when you have community buy-in, when you have the resources to do it. So, like, you know, I hear trust, it's always an issue.
That's a good point. Jeff, did you want to comment? I think you just put something in the chat for us.
I want to share with the rest of the class, Jeff.
I did, I shared it with everyone. Yeah, so this is something that I worked on at HIMSS that it was a toolkit that we put together for kind of considerations to think about related to cybersecurity in small medical practices. So it's a kind of an easy to read guide, you know, focused on 5 different areas, just you know, again, not a huge undertaking, but just like in terms of trying to communicate with small practices, the idea would be you have to make it as simple and dumb it down as much as possible, since, you know, practices again don't likely have a dedicated security person, or if they do have a dedicated security person, they probably are wearing 10 different other hats, you know, to help manage the practice. So I just put it in there as maybe a model to think about in terms of doing something. You know, if we did what Rob suggested, maybe having something for kind of larger entities and then something for smaller entities. I think this is like a good model to kind of consider for how to communicate with smaller entities.
I wanted to use the last few minutes going through a couple of points, and it goes right back to what you were just saying. You know, we did the top 10 points for cybersecurity for small and medium-sized entities. And we did this 2-pager, and it's got WEDI's logo on it, and it also can be reused. And I've been reusing it. I've been speaking to many different entities and saying, take this, use it, disseminate it. It's really been a helpful tool. But if we think about kind of the themes we're talking about, we're definitely hearing that our smaller and I guess mid-sized entities are not doing their risk analysis. We still have that whole angle on risk analysis. You've got, I think I heard the larger entities, and should I say the vendors, are all having to test one another all the time. Is that a good way to say it? I mean, I know it's still happening. Everybody's spending a lot of time doing privacy, security, and cybersecurity, and you know, questionnaires for each other. Is that an angle? I mean, maybe what we do is take this slice it the size and where we kind of come in from the perspective of an angle, and then also having a list, if you will, of other tools. All right, so I'm hearing smaller to mid-size, the issues risk analysis. The larger organizations are spending a lot of time, what do I say it? Third-party vendor vetting. We still can pull together a number of different suggestions, tools, a list of easy references, if you will. And again, we have to say who the right size is for. We've got the potential about the trust. We have the whole concept of no single point of failure. I'm calling it that, but I don't know what we'd end up calling it. Tantien, thoughts here? Did I
Yeah.
lose you?
Sorry. Well, you know what? I think, I mean, I don't think anyone can dispute in terms of the reasons that have been raised here to identify, why risk analysis isn't being done. And to some extent, again, I always think, devil's in the detail. Some of these small companies, maybe that's not even a priority for them. It's like the priority is to keep going, take care of patients, increase revenue stream. Obviously, trusting in the vendor that they've selected to run their IT will also take care of the security and cybersecurity issues.
Right.
And I think they just need to, like a come to, sorry if I don't mean to, come to Jesus moment to say, it's not an if that it happened, it's a when, and how are you prepared to, when your system is breached, you're down.
Well, does anybody want to share anything else? We're just about ready to wrap up.
So I consulted my assistant, Claude. You guys know Claude,
Very helpful.
very helpful, Claude AI instead of ChatGPT, and I asked. And if you believe, right, I said, where are the highest levels of attacks occurring within healthcare? As it relates to cybersecurity, large, medium, or small practices. What came back is that, small, medium-sized practices are hit hardest by ransomware.
Yes.
88% of the attacks or breaches are occurring in that market. Compared to 39%. I don't know how 88 and 39 add up to 100, but larger organizations, maybe 88% of smaller organizations are being attacked and 39% of larger. However, the large organizations suffer the most data exposure. Of course.
Right,
So
right.
22% of the incidences, or 2.2% of the incidents, is 14 breaches represent 76% of the data breach.
Yeah.
Right, so, but again, we speak to what's in it for them.
Right.
It would be interesting to understand, particularly in the small and medium space, as to what percentage of those that were hit to like business.
Right, who lost business. Well, if we have no other comments, I want to end with just a quick story. You were talking about the change healthcare thing. Some of you know this because we did a podcast on it, but in 2023, I was going to my chiropractor, who I go to every couple of weeks to get an adjustment, who was on paper, and I convinced him to go electronic. Finally, he kept saying, I'm gonna leave. He went live with a vendor that, of course, without using Change Healthcare, in January, submitted his very first claims and got caught up in the breach. in February. So that's how I got to have a minute by minute update of everything that was happening across the board. But the thing to tell you all is my husband had been going as well, something to do with his knee. I don't know what he was doing, but we all started getting a huge number of phone calls of people saying, hey, how's your knee? We'd like to sell you this supplement. So clearly, I think a lot of our patients are feeling the effects, going back to patient experience, feeling the effects of all these breaches by these terrible constant outreaches of phone calls and everything you can think of. What is it? Pushing, smishing, phishing, texting, all the different ways. We're just getting clobbered. And I think people don't know what to do. So we're buying the things from Verizon and everybody to stop all those things from coming in, but it's not stopping. And it's clearly related to the breaches. So, well, thank you so much. We really appreciate just the time spent trying to deal with this, because we're clearly in an industry missing something that we need to do. There's a whole bunch of room here for growth, and we're going to take some of your comments and feedback and make it actionable. Tanti, anything you want to close with?
No, thank you very much, everyone. It's a learning experience, and we know we aren't going to be able to find the solution, but I think it would help us understand better the challenges that some of the healthcare partners face in the real world.
Well, thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the conference. Great
Thank
job.
you.
Anything to add?
Leslie, I took Claude and I asked him the question. Any ideas of how many, small businesses close after Reach?